I woke up from emergency surgery confused, in pain, and with my head spinning so badly I couldn't tell where I was. My throat was dry. My body felt heavy. Every breath hurt. And somehow, without even realizing it yet, I was $15,000 poorer. No, it wasn't the hospital bill. At that moment, though, I didn't know any of that. All I knew was that my body felt like it had been hit by a truck. My mind was foggy, and something felt deeply wrong in a way that had nothing to do with my stitches. Before I even get into what happened next, let me tell you who I am. My name is Barbara. I'm 72 years old, retired, widowed. I've lived a quiet life, a careful life. I never chased luxury, never lived beyond my means. I worked hard, saved what I could, paid my bills on time, and believed in doing things the right way. I planned for retirement, for medical emergencies, and maybe, just maybe, leaving something behind for my family when I'm gone. I truly believed I had done everything right. I raised one son. His name is Michael. For most of my life, I thought I had raised a good man. That belief would not survive the month of March. It all started on a random Tuesday morning. Nothing special about the day, no warning signs from the universe. I woke up with a dull ache in my stomach, the kind you assume will pass if you drink some water or sit down for a bit. I told myself it was indigestion. Maybe something I ate, but within an hour that dull ache turned into sharp, twisting pain that made it hard to stand upright. I started sweating. My vision blurred. I leaned over my kitchen counter, gripping the edge, trying to breathe through waves of pain that kept getting worse. I remember thinking, this feels serious. I live alone, so I did what any mother would do. I called my son. Michael answered, sounding rushed and annoyed, like I was interrupting something important. I told him I didn't feel well. I told him the pain was bad. I told him I was scared. His response, Mom, I'm at work. Can't you just call an ambulance? There was no concern in his voice, no urgency, just inconvenience. At the time, I brushed it off. I told myself he was stressed, busy. People make excuses for their children more easily than they admit. I hung up and called emergency services myself. By the time the ambulance arrived, I could barely speak. Every movement sent pain tearing through my abdomen. The paramedics exchanged looks, the kind professionals give each other when they already know something is wrong but don't want to scare you. The ride to the hospital felt endless. Bright lights, sirens, questions I struggled to answer. At the emergency room, everything moved fast, too fast. Doctors pressed on my stomach, machines beeped, nurses spoke in calm but urgent tones. One doctor looked at me, serious and direct, and said words I'll never forget. Your appendix is close to rupturing. We need to operate immediately. There was no time to think, no time to argue, no time to be brave. I had never had surgery in my entire life, not once in 72 years. They asked me about insurance, consent forms, emergency contact information. My hands shook as I said my son's name, Michael. I still believed he would show up for me. As they wheeled me towards surgery, fear wrapped itself around my chest tighter than the pain. I remember staring at the ceiling lights passing above me, one by one, thinking how strange it was that life could change so quickly. One moment you're standing in your kitchen, and the next, strangers are putting you under anesthesia. I whispered a prayer before everything went dark. At that point, I had no idea that the surgery would not be the worst part of the story. Not even close, one of the nurses asked me a simple question as they prepared me for surgery. Who is your emergency contact? Without hesitation, I gave them my son's name, Michael. Even after that phone call earlier, even after the way he sounded irritated, I still believed he would show up when it mattered. That's what sons do. At least that's what I believed for 72 years. The emergency room was overwhelming. Bright fluorescent lights burned my eyes. Machines beeped nonstop. Doctors and nurses moved quickly, speaking in short sentences filled with medical words I barely understood. Clipboards were pushed toward me. Papers were placed in my hands. I was asked to sign forms while my vision swam and my stomach screamed in pain. Everything felt rushed, unreal, like I was watching someone else's life unfold instead of my own. Then a doctor came closer, his voice calm but serious. Your appendix is extremely inflamed. If it ruptures, it could be life-threatening. We need to operate right now. No discussion, no options, just reality. Fear settled deep in my chest. I had never been under anesthesia before, never been cut open, never trusted my life to strangers in masks and gloves. They asked again about next of kin, insurance details, consent for surgery. I repeated Michael's name. About an hour later, just as they were preparing to move me, my son finally arrived. He walked in with his wife, Tiffany. Now, I want to be very careful with my words here, but honesty matters. From the moment Michael married her, I knew she didn't like me. Not in a loud, obvious way, not with insults or arguments. It was quieter than that. The way her eyes lingered on my purse when I visited. The way she asked questions about my savings. The way she talked about planning for the future while smiling too much. She never saw me as family, she saw me as a resource. As I lay there in that hospital bed, barely able to move, Tiffany stood at the foot of the bed and crossed her arms. She didn't ask how I was feeling. She didn't ask if I was scared. She didn't even say hello. Instead, she looked at the doctor and asked, "So how long is this going to take?" Not, "Will she be okay?" Not, "Is this dangerous?" Just how long the inconvenience would last. The doctor explained the procedure: emergency appendectomy. Overnight stay, monitoring afterward, possible complications due to my age. Michael stood beside me and squeezed my hand. "Mom," he said, "we'll be here when you wake up." I looked up at him, searching his face for reassurance. And I believed him. That belief came from decades of being a mother, from scraped knees and school lunches, from late-night phone calls and holiday dinners, from thinking that no matter how old your child gets, they will still show up when you need them. They told me it was time. The nurses began rolling my bed toward the operating room. The ceiling lights passed above me again, one after another. My heart pounded harder with every second. As we reached the doors, I turned my head slightly, trying to catch one last glimpse of my son. Michael stood there, his hand resting on Tiffany's shoulder. She leaned in and whispered something to him. I didn't hear what she said. But I saw his expression change. The doors closed and the world faded into darkness as the anesthesia took over. I don't know how long the surgery lasted. Time disappears when you're unconscious. What I do know is that when I was gone, when I was cut open, stitched back together, and fighting my way through anesthesia, decisions were being made without me. Choices that would change my life in ways I couldn't imagine. I went into surgery believing my son would be there when I woke up. I went into surgery trusting the people I loved. That trust would cost me far more than pain, and when I finally opened my eyes, reality hit me harder than the scalpel ever could. I woke up slowly, like I was being pulled out of deep water. My head felt heavy. My mouth was dry, like I hadn't had a sip of water in days. My body ached in places I didn't even know could hurt. Every breath reminded me that something inside me had been cut, moved, and stitched back together. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. Then the smell hit me. That clean, sharp hospital smell mixed with something metallic. Machines hummed softly around me. A dull beeping sound kept steady time somewhere near my head. I was alive. Relief washed over me, followed almost immediately by fear. I turned my head as much as I could and scanned the room, blinking through the fog of anesthesia. I expected to see my son sitting in a chair. I expected to see a familiar face. I expected someone. There was no one. The chair beside my bed was empty. My heart sank. A nurse noticed I was awake and came over with a gentle smile. She spoke softly, the way nurses do when they know you're vulnerable. "Welcome back," she said. Surgery went well. I swallowed hard and asked the question that had been forming in my mind since the moment I opened my eyes. "Is my son here?" She paused. That pause told me everything. She checked her tablet, stepped out of the room, and came back a minute later. Her expression had changed, still kind but careful. "There's no one waiting for you right now, honey." Those words landed heavier than the pain in my body. I told myself not to panic. I told myself they had probably stepped out for food or coffee or fresh air. Surgery takes time. People get tired. I asked the nurse what time it was. A little after 6 in the evening. Hours had passed. I asked her to help me reach my phone. My hands were shaking as I dialed Michael's number. Straight to voicemail. I tried again. Voicemail. I called Tiffany. Voicemail. I left a message. Short, calm, polite. "I'm awake. Please call me." No reply. As the night settled in, the pain grew sharper. The medication dulled it, but it never fully went away. Every time footsteps passed my room, my heart jumped, hoping they were coming for me. They never did. I spent the night alone, drugged, disoriented, hurting, listening to the sounds of other patients being checked on by family members. Soft voices, chairs moving, laughter from down the hall. Every sound reminded me of what I didn't have. Morning came and still no word from my son. Another day passed, then another. Nurses came and went. Doctors checked my incision. They said I was healing well, especially for my age. They seemed surprised when they realized I had no one visiting me. By the third day, they told me I could be discharged. "Do you have someone coming to pick you up?" the nurse asked. I hesitated. "I'll figure it out," I said. Michael never called. Tiffany never texted. No explanation, no apology, nothing. I packed my few belongings slowly, every movement sending pain through my abdomen. Walking felt like my stitches might tear open with every step. I called a cab. $42 later, I was sitting in the back seat, gripping the door handle as the driver hit every bump in the road. Each one sent a sharp reminder through my body that I should not have been alone. When I finally got home, the house felt colder than usual, too quiet. I lowered myself onto the couch and rested for a while before forcing myself to check my messages. Still nothing. That's when I decided to check my email. And then my bank account. I opened my laptop slowly, still groggy, still in pain, expecting nothing more than the usual bills and notifications. Instead, I saw withdrawals I didn't recognize, large ones. Transfers that made no sense. My hands started shaking again, not from medication this time, but from fear. Thousands of dollars were gone, money I had saved for years, money I never touched, money I didn't authorize. $15,000 vanished. And as I stared at the screen, a terrible realization began to form in my mind. The surgery wasn't the worst thing that happened to me, not even close. The real damage had been done while I was unconscious, and the people responsible were closer to me than I ever imagined. At first, I thought maybe I was still exhausted. Maybe the anesthesia hadn't fully worn off. Maybe my mind was foggy, still trying to catch up after surgery. That happens to older people, right? Confusion, dizziness, delayed thinking. That's what I told myself, because what I was seeing on my laptop screen didn't make any sense at all. I logged into my bank account not because I expected anything to be wrong, but because something in my gut felt off. You know that feeling when you're unsettled for no clear reason, and you check something just to reassure yourself that you're imagining things. 4 days earlier, before I'd collapsed in my kitchen, my checking account balance was a little over $6,000. I remember it clearly because I had checked it that morning. Now, $300, that's it. My heart dropped so fast I felt a sharp pain near my stitches, like my body was reacting before my mind could catch up. No, 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 I whispered, leaning closer to the screen. I clicked refresh. Nothing changed. I refreshed again, harder this time, like force might somehow reverse reality. Still $300. My hands started shaking, and I had to sit back against the couch cushion to steady myself. My breathing became shallow, quick. I tried to tell myself there had to be an explanation. Automatic bills, medical holds, a banking error, anything. I scrolled down to the transaction list. There it was, multiple withdrawals, large ones, back to back, not rent, not utilities, not groceries, things I had never paid for in my life. My chest tightened, and before I could stop myself, I opened my credit card account. The one card I kept for emergencies only, the one I never used, the one I paid off every single month without fail. It took a second to load. Then the balance appeared, maxed out, completely, $15,000. Gone. I stared at the number, waiting for it to change, waiting for it to correct itself, waiting to wake up from what had to be some kind of stress-induced nightmare. This card was my safety net, my backup plan, my just in case. I felt sick. My hands trembled as I clicked into the transaction history. Each line loaded slowly, painfully, like my laptop was forcing me to absorb every detail. And that's when I noticed something strange. The same word kept repeating, again and again and again. Disney, Disney World, Disney Resorts, Disney Tickets, Disney Dining, Disney Gift Shops. I scrolled further, more Disney, different vendors. Different charges, same place. Dates jumped out at me immediately. March 25th, March 26th. Those dates burned into my brain. That was when I was in surgery. That was when I was lying unconscious. That was when I was waking up alone in a hospital bed, scared and drugged, wondering if my son was ever going to show up. While I was fighting for my life, someone was booking theme parks. While I was hooked up to machines, someone was swiping my card. While I was praying I'd wake up again, someone was buying souvenirs. The realization hit me slowly, then all at once. This wasn't a random fraud case. This wasn't a stranger. This wasn't a stolen card number. This was personal. I scrolled deeper into the details. Hotel charges, park passes, dining reservations. Thousands of dollars spent effortlessly, like it wasn't even real money to them. Money I had saved carefully over decades. Money meant for emergencies like the one I'd just survived. My throat went dry. I thought back to a conversation from months earlier, one I hadn't given much importance at the time. Michael had called me sounding casual. Mom, my card's acting weird and Emma's birthday is coming up. Can I just use yours real quick? I'll pay you back. I had hesitated for a second, then I gave him the information. Because he was my son, because I trusted him, because I assumed he'd use it once and forget it existed. I assumed wrong. As I stared at the screen, it became painfully clear that he hadn't forgotten. He'd saved it. And the moment I was weakest, the moment I couldn't check my phone, the moment I couldn't stop him, they used it. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a decision made while I was unconscious. And as that truth settled in, something inside me shifted. The fear was still there. The hurt was still there, but something else was growing quietly underneath it. Clarity. I wasn't just hurt. I wasn't just angry. I felt something deeper than that, something cold and steady settle into my chest. Disrespect like this doesn't just sting. It changes the way you see people. It rearranges your understanding of love, loyalty, and family. And in that moment, sitting alone on my couch with a healing incision and shaking hands, I realized something important. This wasn't careless spending. This was calculated. I kept scrolling. Luxury hotel charges appeared next, the Grand Floridian, one of the most expensive places on Disney property, night after night charged without hesitation. Hundreds of dollars at a time, as if the card had no limit. Then came the experiences: private park tour, priority access passes, character dining reservations, professional photo packages. $300 per person for VIP experiences. I stared at the screen in disbelief. This wasn't a budget trip. This wasn't a family getaway. This was indulgence. Every charge felt like a slap in the face. Souvenirs followed, dozens of them. Clothing, plush toys, collectibles, gift shops I'd never stepped foot in. So many novelty items that I lost count, and the ears, so many pairs of those ridiculous mouse ears. I sat there in silence, my mouth dry, my chest tight, the room suddenly feeling smaller. It wasn't just the amount of money, it was the timing. They didn't wait until I recovered. They didn't ask permission. They didn't warn me. They didn't check in. They waited until I was unconscious. That's the part that hurt the most. Not just that they spent the money, but that they chose the exact moment when I couldn't say no, like thieves who wait until the house is empty. The realization made my stomach churn. I replayed that phone call from months earlier in my mind again, slower this time. Mom, my card's acting weird. That wasn't panic. That wasn't urgency. That was an excuse. He hadn't borrowed my card. He'd stored it, saved it, kept it ready. And when the opportunity came, when I was helpless in a hospital bed, he took everything he could. That wasn't a mistake. That was a decision. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't call him right away. Instead, I took a deep breath and picked up my phone. I called the credit card company. I need to report fraudulent charges, I said, my voice calm but shaking underneath. The woman on the line was polite and professional. She asked questions, verified information, put me on hold twice. When she came back, her tone shifted slightly. Because this person had previous authorization to use your card, the investigation may take some time. My stomach sank. I understood what she meant. Family fraud is complicated. Trust blurs lines. Permission gets twisted. But I wasn't about to sit back and let it continue. Cancel the card, I said firmly. Immediately, she didn't hesitate. Done, she replied. The relief I felt in that moment surprised me. Then I called my bank. I need to close my checking account and open a new one, I told the banker. She didn't ask why. She didn't question me. She just listened as my voice cracked despite my best efforts to keep it steady. Within 20 minutes, it was done. Accounts closed. New ones opened. Access cut off. Everything they were using gone. I leaned back on the couch and closed my eyes for a moment. For the first time since the surgery, I smiled. Not because I was happy, but because they didn't know yet. They were still walking through theme parks, still swiping cards. Still ordering food, still buying souvenirs, clueless. And for the first time in days, I wasn't the one in the dark. At that moment, they were still there, still walking through crowds, still smiling for photos, still spending money they didn't earn. Based on the hotel charges I could see, they had booked their stay through Sunday. It was only Thursday. 4 more days of fantasy left on the calendar. 4 more days of believing everything was fine, or so they thought. I imagined the scene playing out in my head. Michael standing at a counter, ordering breakfast without a second thought. Tiffany browsing a gift shop, arms full of souvenirs. A cashier smiling politely as the card was handed over. Then the pause, the terminal beeping, the screen flashing, declined. I imagined the confusion first, then the embarrassment, then the frustration, multiple attempts, different cards, different excuses, still declined. That image didn't make me feel cruel. It made me feel balanced, because for once, reality was about to interrupt their fantasy. That afternoon, instead of crying or collapsing into self-pity, I did something I'd never done before. I documented everything, every check I had ever written to Michael, every temporary loan that never came back, every moment I told myself I was helping when I was really just enabling. I pulled old bank statements, emails, text messages. I wrote it all down. The house down payment I'd helped with, $30,000, the car emergency, $8,000, groceries, utility bills, school supplies, just until payday. It added up fast. Then I moved on to childcare. Every Tuesday, every Thursday, entire weekends, last-minute calls. Mom, can you watch Emma for a few hours? Hours turned into days. Days turned into years. I counted it all. If I had charged even minimum wage, they owed me over $40,000. Seeing it written out changed something inside me. I wasn't being dramatic. I wasn't exaggerating. I wasn't imagining things. I had been used. Not once, not twice, consistently, quietly, for years. I didn't do this out of revenge. I did it for clarity, because denial is easier when the truth stays blurry. And now the truth was undeniable. That evening, as the sun dipped lower and the house filled with long shadows, my phone rang. Michael's name appeared on the screen. I stared at it for a moment before answering. "Hey, Mom," he said, cheerful and relaxed. "I've been trying to reach you." I almost laughed. The nerve, the timing, the performance. I kept my voice steady. "Oh," I said, "have you?" "Yeah," he replied easily. "We've been super busy. You know how it is, busy," while I was in surgery. While I was alone, while my savings were being drained, I said nothing. He kept talking, filling the silence like nothing was wrong. "Listen, if you see anything weird on your card, don't freak out. It's probably just the hotel putting holds on it. I'll explain later. That was the moment I knew. He still didn't know. He still thought I would clean it up, fix it, cover for him, like I always had. I ended the call politely. Told him to enjoy his trip. Then I set my phone down and took a deep breath, because Friday morning was coming, and Friday morning was going to be chaos. The kind of chaos that happens when consequences finally arrive. They thought I'd fold, they thought I'd excuse it. They thought Grandma would save the day. They forgot one thing: I was done being used. Have you ever woken up, reached for your phone, and instantly known something had gone wrong, not for you, but for someone else? Not because you saw the news, not because someone warned you, but because your body just knew. That was me on Friday morning. I woke up slowly, the way you do after surgery. The pain was still there, a dull, constant reminder pulling at my abdomen every time I shifted in bed. My body felt stiff, heavy, like it needed more time to heal, but my mind clear, clearer than it had been in days. For the first time since collapsing in my kitchen, I didn't feel foggy. I didn't feel confused. I didn't feel overwhelmed. I felt alert. I reached over to my nightstand and picked up my phone. The screen lit up. 17 missed calls, 34 text messages, all from two people, Michael and Tiffany. I didn't open anything yet. I just stared at the numbers for a moment, letting them sink in. 17 calls doesn't happen by accident. 34 messages doesn't happen casually. That kind of volume only comes from panic. The first missed call was timestamped at 8:47 am. I looked at the clock on my wall. 8:53. They'd been trying for 6 minutes. I sat up slowly, careful not to pull at my stitches, and let out a long breath. There was no rush, no urgency on my end. Whatever was happening on the other side of that phone had already started without me. I tapped the call log. The first voicemail preview popped up. "Mom, my card isn't working." Call me, that was it. No greetings, no concern, no "are you feeling okay?" Just a problem, their problem. I didn't feel anger right away. I laughed, not loudly, not cruelly. Just a quiet, surprised little laugh that escaped before I could stop it, because in that moment I understood something very clearly. They had finally noticed. I set the phone down and swung my legs off the bed. Every movement reminded me that my body had been through something serious, but instead of frustration, I felt grounded. Present, I walked slowly into the kitchen and filled the kettle. I made coffee, not the cheap kind I usually drank. Not the watered-down kind I stretched to make it last. I pulled out the good coffee, the kind I saved for company, the kind I always told myself I'd drink another time. Today deserved it. As the coffee brewed, I stood there listening to the familiar sounds of my kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator, the soft bubbling of the kettle, the quiet of a house where no one was demanding anything from me. The phone buzzed again on the counter. Another call. I ignored it. I poured my coffee into my favorite mug, the one with the small chip on the rim that my husband used to tease me about. I carried it to the table and sat down carefully. Then and only then did I unlock my phone. The text messages stacked one on top of the other, short, rushed, demanding. The earliest one came in just minutes after the first call. "Mom, something's wrong with the card." Another buzz interrupted my reading. Another call. I turned the phone face down and took my first sip of coffee. It tasted better than it ever had. I wasn't enjoying their panic. That's important. I wasn't smiling because they were struggling. I was calm because for once I wasn't the one scrambling to fix something I didn't break. For years, I had been the safety net, the backup plan, the quiet solution when things went wrong. Now the silence had shifted, and for the first time they were the ones feeling it. I picked up my phone again and began to scroll. More messages were coming in, faster now. The tone was changing. I could feel it before I even read the words. Because panic has a rhythm, and this was just the beginning. There is a certain sound panic makes when it finally shows up. It's sharp, it's rushed, it trips over itself, and once you've heard it, you never forget it. As I sat at my kitchen table with my coffee slowly cooling in front of me, I unlocked my phone and began reading the messages one by one. The timestamps were close together, minutes apart, as if they were firing them off without stopping to breathe. Michael, 8:52 am. Mom, the breakfast place declined the card. Can you call the bank? No greeting, no concern, straight to instructions. Michael, 9:01 am. This is urgent. Please call me. Urgent. Not "I'm sorry," not "are you okay?" Just urgency. Then Tiffany joined in. Tiffany, 9:03 am. We have 2 children here. Fix this now. That one made my jaw tight. There was no please, no acknowledgement of what they'd done, no hint of humility, just a command. I stared at the screen longer than I needed to, feeling something settle into place inside me. For years, that tone would have worked. Years ago, I would have jumped up, heart racing, trying to solve whatever crisis they created. But something had changed. Michael sent another message. I called the credit card company. They said you canceled it. What's going on? That message sat there, glowing on my screen, and for a moment I almost admired the confidence. The assumption that there had to be some misunderstanding. That of course I'd explain it. That of course I'd reverse it. Oh, now you're confused? I took another sip of coffee and let the silence stretch. The phone rang, Michael. I watched it vibrate on the table until it stopped. Then another call. Tiffany, ignored. Then Michael again. Third call, fourth. Each one came faster than the last, like they were afraid if they paused for even a second, the reality might catch up with them. I didn't rush. I washed my mug. Slowly, carefully, I wiped the counter, straightened a stack of mail. Every small movement grounded me, reminded me that I was in control of my own space, my own time, my own decisions. The phone rang again. I answered. Mom, thank God, Michael said, his voice tight. What's going on with the card? There it was, not concern, not guilt, relief that I'd finally picked up. I canceled it, I said. There was a pause on the line, not silence exactly, more like disbelief struggling to find words. You what? He finally asked. I canceled the credit card, I repeated calmly, and I closed my checking account. His breathing changed. I could hear it, shorter, faster. Mom, are you serious? We're in Disney World. I know, I said. You can't just do that, he said, his voice rising. We have reservations, tickets, hotel charges. That sounds expensive, I replied. Mom, he snapped, this isn't funny. You left me alone during emergency surgery, I said, my voice steady. And you spent $15,000 without asking. We didn't steal, he said quickly. We were going to pay you back. Something inside me hardened. I'd heard that line before. Like the $30,000 you borrowed for the house, I asked. Like the $8,000 for the car. Like every temporary loan that never came back. He didn't answer. I could hear Tiffany in the background, her voice sharp and loud. Tell her we'll talk when we get home, she said. I spoke before he could respond. No, I said. What do you mean no? Michael asked. I mean you're adults, I replied. You took a vacation you couldn't afford using money that wasn't yours. You'll figure it out. How are we supposed to get home? He demanded. I don't know, I said evenly. Make a plan, then he said the one thing he thought would break me. The kids are crying. I didn't hesitate. Tell Emma her grandmother was alone in the hospital because her father chose a vacation over his sick mother. There was shouting now. Tiffany yelling, Michael talking over her. You're selfish, he yelled. I ended the call. The line went dead. My hands were shaking when I set the phone down, not from fear, from release. From the sudden weightlessness of no longer carrying someone else's responsibility. They kept calling. I didn't answer, because while they were scrambling to save their vacation, I was preparing to make a decision that would change everything. After I ended the call, the house was silent again. No voices, no demands, no ringing phone in my ear, just quiet. My hands were shaking, but not the way they had been shaking earlier that week. Not from fear, not from shock. This was different. This was the kind of shaking that comes when you finally stop holding something heavy you've carried for too long. I sat there for a moment, staring at the blank screen of my phone. It lit up again almost immediately. Michael. Then Tiffany, then Michael again. I turned the phone face down. For years, that sound would have sent my heart racing. I would have rushed to fix things, to calm everyone down, to smooth over the mess even when I didn't make it. But this time I stayed still, I breathed, and in that quiet space something uncomfortable but honest surfaced. Grief, not just for the money, not just for the betrayal, but for the son I thought I had. I thought back to when Michael was little. How he used to hold my hand crossing the street. How he'd look for me in the audience at school events. How he once cried for hours when I had the flu because he was scared something would happen to me. Somewhere along the way, that boy disappeared, and the man standing in his place had learned that if he pushed hard enough, I would always give in. That realization hurt more than the surgery, but it also clarified everything. I picked my phone back up not to answer calls, but to take screenshots. Every message, every missed call, every angry voicemail, I saved them. Then I opened a new note and began writing, not emotional thoughts, not accusations, facts. Dates, amounts, conversations I remembered clearly. I documented the hospital stay, the time stamps, the charges that happened while I was under anesthesia. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do with this information yet. But I knew one thing, I was done pretending this was normal. That afternoon, the calls slowed down. Panic had turned into frustration, frustration into anger, anger into silence. By early evening, the phone stopped ringing altogether. I assumed they were figuring something out, calling friends, maxing out whatever else they could. And for the first time, that wasn't my concern. I heated up soup and ate slowly, listening to the clock tick on the wall. My body still needed rest, but my mind felt awake in a way it hadn't in years. That night, as I lay in bed, I didn't feel guilty. I expected to. I expected that familiar voice in my head telling me I was being too harsh, too cold, too unforgiving. It never came. Instead, I felt something steadier. Resolve, because this wasn't about one bad decision. It wasn't about a vacation. It wasn't even about money. It was about boundaries that had never existed. About respect that had slowly eroded. About a line that should have been drawn years ago. And now, finally, it had been. The next morning, I woke up to a single text from Michael, "We need to talk." I stared at it for a long time. There was no apology, no acknowledgement, no understanding, just expectation. I didn't respond right away. I made breakfast. I took my medication. I sat by the window and watched the world move on without me needing to intervene. Because before I talked to him again, I needed to decide something important, not what I was going to say, but what I was no longer willing to tolerate. That decision would shape everything that came next. And once it was made, there would be no going back. Some people react to betrayal by yelling. Some people cry. Some people beg. Some people try one last time to fix what's already broken. I didn't do any of that. I made a phone call. Saturday morning arrived quietly. Too quietly, the house was still. The kind of stillness that comes after chaos when everything has burned down and there's nothing left to make noise. Michael and Tiffany were still stranded. I knew that much. The calls had slowed, but the tension hadn't disappeared. I could feel it hovering, waiting for me to cave. Instead, I reached for my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in 15 years. Harold Brennan. He was the attorney who handled my husband's estate after he passed away. An old-school man, careful, direct, not sentimental, not dramatic, the kind of person who listens more than he speaks and speaks only when it matters. He answered on the second ring. "Barbara," he said, surprise and recognition in his voice. "It's been a long time." "It has," I replied. My voice was calm, steadier than I expected. "I need to see you today." There was a pause. "A professional one. What can I help you with?" "I need to change my will," I said. Immediately, that got his attention. "Can you come into the office?" he asked. "Yes," I said. This afternoon, by 2 o'clock, I was sitting in his office chair, my incision aching under my sweater, my body still healing, but my posture straight, my dignity intact. Harold studied me quietly before speaking again. "You don't usually make decisions like this lightly," he said, "so tell me what's going on." And I did. I told him about the emergency surgery, the phone call where my son told me to just call an ambulance, the hours I spent alone after surgery, the discharge with no ride, the cab home. Then I told him about the money, the checking account drained, the credit card maxed out, the charges made while I was unconscious, Disney hotels, tickets, dining, all of it. I told him about the years before that too, the house down payment, the car emergency, the endless temporary help that never came back. I didn't cry, I didn't exaggerate, I didn't raise my voice, I simply laid out the facts. Harold didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he leaned back slightly, his jaw tight, his expression hard to read. "That," he said slowly, "is deeply disturbing." I nodded. "And for the record," he added, "you are not overreacting." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "I want my son removed from everything," I said. The room went quiet. "Everything?" he asked carefully. "Yes," I replied. "The house, savings, benefits, all of it." He studied me again, this time longer. "Do you have alternate beneficiaries in mind?" he asked. "I do." I told him the names: a children's hospital, a women's shelter, an animal rescue organization, places that helped people who didn't take advantage of kindness. He nodded slowly. "That's very clear," he said. "I can draft this today." "I need it signed today," I replied. There was no hesitation in my voice, no uncertainty. Harold paused for a moment, then stood. "All right," he said, "let's do it properly." As he walked toward his desk, I sat there, feeling the weight of what I was doing, but not regret. This wasn't a punishment, it wasn't revenge, it was protection. For the first time in my life, I wasn't planning for someone else's future. I was securing my own peace. Cutting someone off doesn't always come with shouting or slammed doors. Sometimes it looks quiet. Sometimes it looks like a woman standing alone in her living room, holding a cardboard box, deciding what stays and what goes. While Harold worked on the paperwork, I went home. The drive back felt strange. Not heavy, not rushed, just deliberate. Every stoplight gave me time to think, and with each mile, something loosened inside my chest. When I unlocked my front door, the house felt familiar in a new way. Not lonely, mine. I set my purse down, took off my shoes, and stood still for a moment. Then I opened the hall closet and pulled out the stack of boxes I'd kept for years, the ones I used whenever Michael and the kids visited and left things behind. This time was different. I started in the living room, Jake's toy cars scattered under the coffee table, Emma's crayons in a chipped plastic box, coloring books half-finished, pages torn out. I picked each item up slowly, not angrily. Not dramatically, just calmly. I placed them in a box one by one. Next came the photos. Family pictures from holidays, birthdays, smiling faces framed and hung on my walls because I believed that's what a grandmother was supposed to do. I took them down. The nail holes stared back at me like tiny reminders of all the times I'd rearranged my life to make room for theirs. I wrapped each frame in newspaper and packed them away. I moved into the guest room next. Extra clothes the kids kept there, old backpacks, shoes they never took home, another box, then another. Every item I touched carried a memory, not all bad, but all connected to a version of myself that no longer existed. The version who always said yes, who always adjusted, who told herself it was temporary, that things would balance out eventually. They never did. In the kitchen, I found a spare key taped inside a drawer. The spare key. The one I'd given Michael years ago, just in case. I held it in my palm for a long time. That key had opened my home when I wasn't there, had given access without asking, had represented trust. I took it off my key ring and set it on the counter. On Monday, the locks would be changed. I finished packing just as the afternoon light began to soften through the windows. My body ached. My incision reminded me that I was still healing. But my mind felt steady. At 4 o'clock, I was back in Harold's office. The papers were ready. 2 witnesses sat quietly at the table. Harold slid the documents toward me and explained everything carefully, even though he knew I understood. This revokes all previous versions, he said. These designations are final unless you change them again. I read every page, slowly, thoroughly. When I reached the signature line, I didn't hesitate. I signed my name, once, then again. The witnesses signed, the papers were stamped, filed, legal. Harold looked at me with something close to concern. "Are you sure you don't want time to think about this?" he asked gently. "Decisions like this can be emotional." I met his eyes. "I've had 72 years to think," I said. "This isn't sudden, it's overdue." He nodded. "All right," he said quietly. "It's done." As I stood to leave, something surprised me. I felt lighter, not relieved in a dramatic way. Not euphoric, just lighter. Like I'd been holding my breath for decades without realizing it, and someone had finally opened a window. I walked out of his office with copies of the will in my bag and a calm I hadn't felt in years. I didn't know how Michael would react when he found out. I didn't know what Tiffany would say. I didn't know how the kids would understand any of this. But I knew one thing for certain: the cycle had ended. And what came next would not be decided by guilt. They thought I would cool off, that if they just waited a day or two, I'd soften, that guilt would creep in, that I'd remember the kids, the holidays, the years of pretending everything was fine. They were wrong. Sunday night, my phone buzzed once, a message from Michael. "We're coming home tomorrow, we need to talk." I stared at the screen for a long moment. The wording said everything. Not "can we talk," not "I'm sorry," not "are you okay." Just expectation. I typed one sentence: "Do not come to my house." Then I blocked both his number and Tiffany's. Immediately, no explanation, no argument, no opening for negotiation. Monday morning, I woke early. The sky outside my window was pale and quiet. My body still moved slowly, carefully, but my mind was clear, focused. At 9 o'clock, the locksmith arrived. He was polite, efficient, didn't ask questions. New locks on every door. New deadbolts, new keys, one key for me. One spare, not for family, not for obligation, but for my neighbor Helen, a woman who checked on me without asking for anything in return. When the locksmith left, I stood in my hallway and tested the door myself. Locked, secure, mine. At 2:30 in the afternoon, there was a knock, firm, insistent. I didn't need to look to know who it was, but I did anyway. Through the peephole, I saw them: Michael, Tiffany, the kids standing between them, confused and tired. Michael knocked again. "Mom, open the door," he called. I stayed silent. Another knock, louder this time. "Mom, we need to talk." "This is ridiculous." Still nothing. Then I heard a small voice. "Grandma, Emma, that one hurt. I won't lie and pretend it didn't." My hand rested against the door, my heart tightening for just a second. But then the images came flooding back: the hospital room, the empty chair, the nurse shaking her head, the bank statements glowing on my screen. "Don't be dramatic, Mom." That was what he'd said once, years ago, when I cried over feeling taken for granted. I stayed where I was. They waited, argued quietly at first, then louder. I could hear Tiffany's voice sharp with irritation. "This is insane," she snapped. "She can't do this." Michael tried the spare key. I heard the metal slide into the lock. "Then stop," he tried again. Nothing. "She changed the locks," he said, disbelief heavy in his voice. "Yes," Tiffany replied angrily. "She actually changed the locks." There was silence after that. The kind that happens when reality finally settles in. They stood there for 40 minutes. 40, long enough to argue, long enough to hope, long enough to realize I wasn't coming to rescue them. Eventually, they left. I watched through the window as they walked back to their car. No dramatic goodbye, no final speech, just defeat. I leaned my forehead against the wall and exhaled slowly. I didn't feel cruel. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt calm. Because boundaries aren't punishment, they're protection. They don't exist to hurt others. They exist to stop the bleeding. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. No calls, no messages, no pressure, just quiet. They thought it was over. It wasn't, because when entitlement loses access, it doesn't disappear. It changes tactics, and next they would try guilt, then fear, then manipulation. And that's when I would make the final choice, not just about money or access or forgiveness, but about whether someone who betrays you gets to remain family at all. First, they were angry. That stage didn't last long, but it was loud while it did. Michael left voicemails that bounced between disbelief and accusation. His words came fast, clipped, like he was trying to regain control through volume alone. "You're blowing this out of proportion. This is insane. You're destroying the family over a misunderstanding. I deleted those messages without listening to them twice. Then the anger softened. That's when the begging began. The week after they came back from their trip was relentless. My phone stayed silent because I had blocked their numbers, but my email inbox filled up instead, message after message, different tones, different tactics. Michael's emails came first, longer, carefully worded, almost reasonable. Mom, I don't know how things got this bad. I've been under so much stress. You know I'd never intentionally hurt you. He talked about work, money pressure. Marriage tension, everything except the hospital, everything except the charges, everything except the truth. Then slowly the language shifted. That's when he brought up Emma. Emma asks about you every day, he wrote. She doesn't understand why Grandma doesn't love her anymore. I stared at that sentence for a long time, because that one landed close to the heart, not deep enough to break me, but close enough to sting. I imagined Emma's small hands, her laugh, the way she used to crawl into my lap with a book and demand I read the same story twice. For a moment, I felt that familiar pull, the instinct to fix things, to reassure, to smooth everything over for the sake of the children. Almost then I reminded myself of something important. I hadn't stopped loving my grandchildren. I had stopped allowing myself to be used. Those two things are not the same. The next email mentioned Jake. His birthday was coming up. He really wants you there. He keeps asking if Grandma will come. Please don't punish the kids for our mistakes. That one was clever because it reframed the situation. Suddenly, I wasn't a woman protecting herself. I was a grandmother withholding love, a villain in their rewritten story. I closed my laptop because guilt is powerful, but only when you accept the false premise behind it. I wasn't punishing anyone. I wasn't withdrawing affection. I wasn't being cruel. I was holding a boundary. And boundaries feel like rejection to people who benefited from having none. More messages followed, some apologetic, some emotional, some passive-aggressive. One email ended with, I hope you can live with yourself. I could, because I had already lived through emergency surgery alone, because I had already lived through betrayal. Because I had already lived through the realization that love without respect turns into entitlement, and I wasn't going back to that. I didn't respond, not once. Silence wasn't avoidance, it was intentional. Because every time I had tried to explain myself in the past, it had turned into an argument about my feelings, as if my pain needed their approval to be valid. This time, I let my actions speak. I let them sit with the discomfort, with the consequences, with the truth they were trying so hard to avoid. Days passed, then weeks. The emails slowed, the tone shifted again, and that's when I knew the next phase was coming, because when guilt doesn't work, people escalate. When guilt didn't work, they changed strategies. That's how you know someone isn't sorry, they just haven't found the right pressure point yet. The first sign came in the mail, a certified letter. I noticed it immediately because nothing good ever arrives in an envelope that requires a signature. The paper was heavier than usual, official-looking, with my name printed neatly across the front. I signed for it, closed the door, and sat at the kitchen table before opening it. The letter was from Tiffany, not a lawyer yet, but written like someone who had spent an afternoon on the internet learning legal phrases. The words were sharp, cold, accusatory. She claimed I was causing emotional harm. She accused me of withholding access. She used a phrase that made my eyebrows rise, grandparent alienation. I read it twice, then I laughed. Not because it was funny, it wasn't. I laughed because it was desperate. They weren't asking anymore. They weren't apologizing. They weren't pretending to understand. They were threatening, and threats don't come from strength. They come from losing control. The letter went on to say that if I didn't resume contact immediately, they would explore legal remedies. It framed me as unstable, vindictive, and emotionally manipulative. There was no mention of the hospital, no mention of the money. No mention of the credit card, just a carefully rewritten story where I was suddenly the problem. I folded the letter neatly and placed it in a folder I had started keeping. Evidence, because something else had changed by then. I wasn't reacting anymore, I was observing. A few days later, my phone rang from an unfamiliar number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Barbara, a man's voice said gently. It's Tom, Michael's friend. I remembered Tom. I'd met him at barbecues and birthday parties. He always smiled too much and avoided eye contact when conversations turned serious. He's really struggling, Tom continued. He's not sleeping. This whole thing is tearing him apart. Maybe you could just talk to him. I listened quietly. Then I asked one question. If your mother was in emergency surgery, I said calmly, would you take your family to a theme park using her credit card? There was a pause. A long one. I don't know the whole story, Tom said finally. I do, I replied, and so does Michael. Silence again. I'm not asking you to pick sides, I added. But don't ask me to ignore reality to make him more comfortable. Tom cleared his throat. I'll let him know you're not ready, he said. I am ready, I corrected him, just not willing. The call ended shortly after. That was when I understood something important. They weren't trying to fix what they broke. They were trying to wear me down, threats, flying messengers, legal language. These were intimidation tactics, subtle ones, but tactics all the same. And the more they escalated, the clearer it became. They didn't see me as a person, they saw me as an obstacle. I brought the letter to Harold's office the next morning. He read it carefully, then looked up at me over his glasses. "This has no legal weight," he said. "It's posturing." "That's what I thought," I replied. He nodded. "But keep everything, every message, every attempt to intimidate you." I already was, because this wasn't just about money anymore. It was about control, and the moment someone tries to frighten you into compliance, the relationship has already crossed a line it can't uncross. That afternoon, another email came in, shorter this time, colder. "We hope you understand the seriousness of this situation." I did perfectly. They weren't grieving, they weren't reflecting, they weren't taking responsibility. They were angry that access had been revoked. And that told me everything I needed to know. The strange thing about stepping away from chaos is how quiet everything becomes afterward. Not empty, not lonely, just quiet. 3 weeks after my surgery, my doctor cleared me for light activity. Nothing strenuous, nothing rushed, just movement. Careful steps back into my body, back into the world, so I made changes, small ones at first. I signed up for water aerobics at the community center. I almost talked myself out of it. New places still made me nervous, but I went anyway. The water eased the stiffness in my joints, and the women there welcomed me without questions. They laughed loudly, complained freely, judged no one. No one asked what I could give. No one hinted at what they needed. They just let me exist. Twice a week, I floated, stretched, and listened to stories that had nothing to do with my past role as a fixer. Then I started volunteering at the library. Every Thursday afternoon, I read to children during story hour, kids who didn't know my last name, kids who didn't care what kind of car I drove or whether I had savings. To them, I was just the woman who did the silly voices right and always remembered their favorite book. They didn't see me as a resource. They saw me as a person. That mattered more than I expected. A month later, I met with a financial advisor. I almost canceled the appointment. Fear has a way of convincing you not to look too closely, but I went. She was kind but direct, spread papers across the table. Asked clear questions, didn't soften the truth. "You've given your son just under $97,000 over the years," she said gently. Hearing the number out loud felt like being punched in the chest. I nodded. "I know it's painful," she continued, "but here's the other part of the picture." She pointed to another page. "Your house is paid off, your income is stable, your expenses are manageable. You'll recover most of the fraudulent charges." I let out a slow breath. "You're not ruined," she said, "not even close." Those words settled something deep inside me. I walked out of that office lighter than I'd walked in, not because the past disappeared, but because the future was no longer fragile. Meanwhile, they were still spiraling. Mutual acquaintances stopped bringing them up as often. The urgency faded, the drama lost momentum once it stopped producing results. Life, it turns out, moves on when you stop feeding dysfunction. Months passed, my routine solidified, my strength returned, my laughter came easier. And then one afternoon there was a knock on my door, just one, not aggressive, not demanding. I checked the peephole. Michael, alone, no Tiffany, no children, no performance. He looked smaller somehow, older. The confidence that once bordered on entitlement was gone. I didn't open the door right away. I stood there, hand resting on the frame, heart steady, because the truth was this: I wasn't afraid of him anymore. And I wasn't waiting for him either. When I finally opened the door, he didn't step forward. "Mom," he said quietly, "can we talk?" I studied his face. This wasn't panic. This wasn't anger. This was something else. Regret, loss. Or simply the realization that access was no longer guaranteed. I didn't know yet. And for the first time, I didn't rush to decide. Because whatever he was about to say, I had already built a life that didn't depend on his approval, his apologies, or his presence. And that meant I finally had the freedom to choose. You can tell when someone's life has collapsed. They don't knock the way they used to. It was a Tuesday afternoon in July, the kind of quiet afternoon where the light sits heavy in the air and the house feels still, almost thoughtful. I had just finished watering the plants in my backyard and was sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of iced tea, enjoying the simple comfort of routine. Then came the knock, not loud, not confident, not impatient. Just a soft, uneven sound against the door. I froze for a moment, not because I was afraid, but because I recognized the rhythm. I stood up slowly and walked to the front door. My body still moved carefully, but without the fragility I'd felt months earlier. I reached the peephole and looked through it. Michael, alone, no Tiffany, no kids, no phone glued to his hand, no air of entitlement. He looked worn down. He'd lost weight, his face was thinner, sharper in a way that suggested stress rather than intention. Dark circles sat under his eyes like bruises that never healed. His shoulders sagged forward as if he were carrying something heavy he couldn't set down. This wasn't the man who had stood confidently in my driveway years ago asking for help just this once. This was someone who had run out of places to land. Against my better judgment, I opened the door, but I kept the chain on. The metal slid into place with a firm click, a boundary you could hear. He looked up, surprised for just a second, then nodded as if he understood. "What do you want, Michael?" I asked. My voice didn't shake, it didn't rise, it was flat. "Neutral, controlled. I just need 5 minutes," he said. Not a greeting, not an apology, a request. I studied him carefully, the way you study someone when you're no longer emotionally invested in guessing what they need. His eyes darted briefly into the house like he was hoping to see something familiar, something welcoming. I didn't move. "You can talk from there," I said. The chain held firm between us. He swallowed. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched long enough to become uncomfortable, and I didn't rush to fill it. I had learned that silence reveals more than words ever could. Michael shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "I didn't think it would come to this," he said finally. I didn't respond. "I know things got bad," he continued, his voice quieter now, "but I didn't expect you to shut me out completely." That sentence told me more than he probably realized. He still saw himself as someone who deserved access, still believed distance was something done to him, not a consequence of his choices. I waited. He rubbed his hands together, a nervous habit from childhood that I hadn't seen in years. I need to talk to you," he said again. I leaned slightly against the doorframe, my posture relaxed. "You're talking," I replied, his jaw tightened. "I mean, really talk." There it was. The expectation that if he stood there long enough, I'd unlock the chain, let him in, invite him to sit, offer coffee, slip back into the role I had played for decades, the role where I listened, excused, absorbed. I stayed exactly where I was. From this side of the door, I noticed details I might have missed before, the way his clothes hung loosely on his frame, the faint redness around his eyes, the exhaustion that no amount of justification could hide. Something had happened. Something big, and for the first time I understood something clearly. He wasn't here because he missed me. He was here because he had nowhere else to go. I felt a flicker of something then, not anger, not sadness, distance. A clean, sharp distance that let me see the situation without emotion blurring the edges. I didn't invite him in. I didn't tell him to leave. I simply waited. And eventually, with a sigh that sounded more like defeat than courage, Michael spoke again. "Sometimes people don't show up to take responsibility. They show up because everything else in their life has fallen apart." Michael stood there on my porch, hands jammed into his pockets, eyes darting anywhere but my face. The silence stretched until it became unbearable for him. "Tiffany left me," he said, just like that, no build-up, no apology first, no acknowledgement of why he was standing outside my door instead of inside my life. I didn't react, I didn't gasp, I didn't soften, I didn't say I was sorry, because I wasn't. "She's filing for divorce," he continued, his voice rough. "She took the kids and went to her parents' house, still nothing from me." That seemed to bother him. He shifted again, cleared his throat, waiting for comfort that didn't come. "She said I'm useless," he added. "Said my family is useless too." That one was meant to sting. It didn't. Then he looked directly at me for the first time, his eyes sharp with something familiar, accusation. "You started all of this," he said. There it was. The blame arrived right on schedule. I felt no surge of anger. No urge to defend myself, just clarity. "No," I said calmly. "You did," he scoffed, shaking his head. "You cut us off," he snapped. "You canceled the card, you embarrassed us. You turned everything upside down. You abandoned me during emergency surgery," I replied evenly, "and you spent money you didn't ask for while I was unconscious." His jaw tightened. "It wasn't stolen," he said quickly. "You're my mom, you've always helped." Helping is choice. Stealing is taking when someone can't say no. I let that silence sit between us. "How long are you going to punish me?" he asked, frustration creeping into his voice. Punish. That word told me everything. He still believed this was discipline, a timeout, a phase, not a consequence. I looked at him and felt something unsettling. Nothing, no anger, no heartbreak, no longing, just absence. That realization startled me more than anything he had said. "You're acting like I did this on purpose," he continued. "Like I wanted to hurt you. You wanted what you wanted," I replied. "And my pain didn't stop you." His eyes dropped to the porch floor. For a moment, just a moment, I wondered if this was the point where remorse would finally show up, where he'd say the words that mattered. I was wrong. "You've always been dramatic," he muttered. "You bounce back, you always do." That sentence closed the door inside me more firmly than any lock ever could. I saw it then, clearly and painfully. He hadn't come to make things right. He'd come because his wife left, because his safety net was gone, because he needed someone to absorb the consequences he didn't want to face alone. "You didn't ask how I was," I said quietly. He frowned. "After the surgery," I continued, "you never asked if I was okay, not once." He opened his mouth, closed it. "You called me once," I went on, "from your vacation, to tell me how magical it was." His shoulders slumped slightly, but still no apology came. no regret, no ownership, only discomfort. I realized then that this conversation was never going to become what I once hoped it would be. Because he wasn't standing there to face the damage he caused. He was standing there hoping I'd erase it. And that was something I was no longer willing to do. The most painful part of that moment wasn't the anger, it wasn't even the blame. It was the realization that after everything, the surgery, the money, the abandonment, he still didn't understand why he was standing outside my door. "You haven't apologized," I said. The words came out quietly without accusation, just fact. Michael blinked like he hadn't expected that. "I mean," he started, then stopped. He opened his mouth again, searching for something, anything that might work. Nothing came because apologies require ownership, and ownership requires humility. "You're here because your wife left," I continued. "Because you lost your house, because you need help again." He flinched. "That's not," he began. "It is," I said gently, "and that's why this hurts. You didn't come because you were sorry. You came because you ran out of options." The porch was silent except for the distant sound of traffic. I watched his face closely, hoping foolishly that something would shift, that remorse would finally surface, that he'd say the words that mattered. "I messed up. I hurt you. I'm sorry." Instead, he stared at the ground. "Do you even know how my surgery went?" I asked. He swallowed. "Did you ever ask if I was okay?" Still nothing. "You called me once," I said, "from your vacation. You told me how magical it was. How beautiful everything looked." His shoulders sagged, but the silence remained. That's when I understood. This wasn't denial anymore. This was indifference. I took a breath. "There's something you should know," I said. He looked up, alert now. Hope flickering behind his eyes. "I changed my will." His head snapped up fully this time. "What?" "I changed it," I repeated. "4 months ago." He stared at me, confused. "Everything goes to charity," I said. "A children's hospital, a women's shelter, an animal rescue." The color drained from his face. "You can't do that," he said quickly. "I'm your son." "I already did," I replied. "It's signed, witnessed, legal." He shook his head, panic rising. "That's not fair," he said. "You're doing this to punish me." "No," I said calmly. "I'm doing this because you already took everything I was willing to give." His mouth opened, but no words came out. For the first time since he'd arrived, he looked genuinely scared, not of losing me, of losing access. "I'm not asking for money," he said weakly. "I just want things to go back to normal, normal." Normal was me alone in a hospital bed. Normal was me paying for vacations I wasn't invited on. Normal was silence when I needed support. "I don't want normal," I said. "I want peace." I reached up and slid the chain loose. For just a second, his eyes lit up, hope again, misplaced and desperate. Then I closed the door, not slowly, not dramatically, just firmly. The lock clicked. I stood there for a moment, my hand resting against the wood, my heart steady. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel cruel. I felt finished. Finished explaining. Finished justifying. Finished bleeding for someone who refused to see the wound. When I walked back into my living room, the sunlight through the window felt warm, familiar, safe. And this time I didn't look back. I thought that was the end. I was wrong. Because months later, I saw them again, and something finally changed. Healing doesn't mean erasing memory. It doesn't mean pretending things never happened or waking up one day without scars. Sometimes healing looks much quieter than people expect. Sometimes it looks like living your life again. 6 months after my surgery, I was out to lunch. Nothing special, no celebration, no milestone, just a normal afternoon, the kind I hadn't allowed myself to enjoy for a long time. I was sitting at a small restaurant near the community center with Helen, my neighbor, and 2 women from water aerobics. The place smelled like warm bread and coffee. Sunlight filtered through the front windows, landing on the table in soft patches. We were laughing, not politely, not nervously, real laughter, talking about sore knees, bad dates, and the ridiculous instructor who played the same playlist every week like it was a personal challenge. I was mid-sentence, fork in hand, when something made me stop. That feeling, the one you get before your brain catches up. I looked up, and there they were, Michael, Tiffany, Jake, Emma, same restaurant, different energy. For a split second, the room felt too loud and too quiet at the same time. My body went still, like it had learned that reflex long before my mind told it to. They were seated a few tables away. Jake was swinging his legs under the chair, distracted. Emma was coloring on a paper menu. Michael sat stiffly, shoulders tight. Tiffany leaned close to him, her mouth moving quickly, sharply. I didn't hear what she said. I didn't need to. I watched her grab his arm, fingers pressing in as she whispered something that clearly wasn't kind. Her eyes flicked toward me, then away. Michael shook his head once, firmly. That alone told me something had changed. Then he stood up. My heart skipped, not from fear, but from surprise. He walked toward our table slowly, like he wasn't sure whether to keep going or turn back. Helen noticed immediately. Her laughter faded and she looked from him to me, her expression sharpening with concern. The women beside her went quiet. "Is everything okay?" one of them asked softly. I nodded. "I think it will be," I said. Michael stopped a few feet away. He didn't smile, he didn't sigh, he didn't look angry, he looked careful. Mom, he said, just that, no expectation, no assumption. Helen straightened in her chair. Can we talk? He asked. Privately, I took a breath and glanced at my friends. No one rushed me, no one pushed. That alone reminded me how different my life was now. You have 2 minutes, I said. His shoulders relaxed slightly, like he hadn't realized how tense he'd been until that moment. We stepped outside. The air felt warmer than I expected. Summer had settled in fully while I hadn't been paying attention. Cars passed. Someone laughed across the street. Life moved on around us, completely indifferent to the history standing on the sidewalk. Michael stood there, hands clasped together, fingers fidgeting. He didn't speak right away. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't rush to fill the silence. I studied him. He looked healthier than the last time I'd seen him, not confident, not fixed, but steadier. There was still weight on his face, still consequences in his posture, but something else too. Awareness. I didn't plan this, he said quietly. Seeing you here. I figured, I replied. He stopped, exhaled. I wanted to say hello. That was new. No demands, no explanation, no agenda, at least not an obvious one. I nodded once. He glanced back through the window toward his family, then back at me. I won't keep you long, he said. I promise. I didn't respond. Because sometimes the most important thing isn't what someone says next, it's whether they're finally willing to sit with the discomfort they caused. And for the first time, Michael didn't seem in a hurry to escape it. You can tell when someone is lying to protect themselves. Their words rush ahead of their feelings. They explain too much. They defend before you even accuse them. This was different. Michael stood there with his hands trembling slightly at his sides. He wasn't pacing. He wasn't filling the air with excuses. He wasn't trying to control the moment. He took a breath. I've been in therapy, he said quietly, twice a week. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't hear him, but because I wanted to see what came next when there was no immediate reassurance. He nodded once, like he expected the silence. My therapist helped me see things I didn't want to see, he continued. How I treated you, how I let Tiffany treat you, how I justified things that never should have been justified. Still, I waited. He shifted his weight, eyes dropping to the sidewalk. I told myself you were strong, he said, that you could handle anything, that you didn't need me the way other parents need their kids. He swallowed hard. That was a lie I used so I wouldn't feel guilty. The words landed quietly between us, not dramatic, not rehearsed. Truth has a certain weight to it. It doesn't ask to be believed, it just exists. I took from you, he went on. Over and every time you gave, I told myself it was love. He shook his head. It wasn't love, it was entitlement. That word mattered. He didn't rush past it, didn't soften it, didn't replace it with something gentler. I abused your generosity, he said. I felt my chest tighten, not with pain, but recognition. That sentence acknowledged something no one in my family had ever named out loud. I abandoned you, he continued, during surgery. When you needed me, I chose convenience, I chose comfort. His voice cracked slightly, but he didn't stop. And I stole from you, he said. I told myself I'd pay it back, but the truth is I didn't care enough to stop. There it was. No excuses, no blaming Tiffany, no reference to stress or pressure or misunderstanding, just ownership. I justified it, he said quietly. I told myself you owed me, that I was entitled to what you had because you were my mother. I watched his face closely. He wasn't looking for forgiveness. He wasn't fishing for sympathy. He was naming what he'd done and letting it sit there, ugly and undeniable. I'm sorry, he said, 2 words, no additions, no conditions, no follow-up, just sorry. I believed him. Not because I wanted to, not because it would be easier, but because for the first time, he wasn't asking me to carry his emotions for him. He stood there and held them himself. We stood in silence for a moment. Inside the restaurant, I could see Helen watching through the window, her face calm but alert. The women at the table had gone back to their food, giving us space without prying. Michael glanced inside briefly, then back at me. I'm not here to ask for anything, he said. Not money, not forgiveness, not access. That caught my attention. I know I don't get to decide what happens next, he added. I needed you to hear this, even if it doesn't change anything. That mattered too, because accountability doesn't demand resolution, it accepts uncertainty. I don't expect you to trust me, he said. I wouldn't. We stood there, 2 people bound by history but no longer trapped by it. I felt something unfamiliar then, not relief, not reconciliation, possibility. Not for a relationship, not yet, but for truth existing without manipulation. I'm doing the work, he said quietly. Whether you're in my life or not. He didn't promise he'd changed. He didn't say therapy fixed him. He just said he was showing up. And for the first time, I didn't feel the urge to protect myself from his words, because they weren't reaching for me. They were standing on their own. Apologies don't erase damage. They don't rewind time. They don't undo choices. They don't magically restore trust. What they do, if they're real, is open a door to possibility. and possibility still comes with boundaries. I looked at Michael for a long moment before speaking. I don't know if I can trust you again, I said. My voice didn't tremble, I didn't soften it. It wasn't a threat, it was honesty. I wouldn't expect you to, he replied immediately. That answer mattered, he didn't argue. He didn't say he deserved another chance. He didn't try to convince me that time had already fixed everything. He accepted it. I'm not here to ask for money, he continued, or forgiveness, or the will. Good. I just wanted to know how you're doing, he said, because you're my mom. That sentence hit differently, not because it was emotional, but because it wasn't transactional. I glanced back through the restaurant window. Jake and Emma were sitting quietly, coloring. Their heads bent together over the table. They looked peaceful, normal. Tiffany sat stiffly across from them, arms crossed, clearly uncomfortable. She wasn't watching us. She wasn't smiling. For the first time, she didn't look in control. I need more time, I said, turning back to Michael. He nodded. I understand. No sigh, no disappointment, no pressure. I'll wait, he said, not forever, not expectantly, just wait. We stood there awkwardly for a moment. Then, without planning it, we hugged, brief, careful, a little stiff, but real, not a reunion, not forgiveness. Acknowledgement. We stepped apart almost immediately. I won't come by again unless you say it's okay, he said. And if you decide you never want that, I'll respect it. That was new too. I hope you're well, he added quietly. Then he turned and walked back inside. I watched him rejoin his family. He didn't sit next to Tiffany. He took a chair at the edge of the table. Jake looked up and smiled at him. Emma showed him her drawing. For a moment, everything looked almost ordinary. But ordinary doesn't mean healed. I went back inside and sat down with Helen and the others. No one asked questions. No one pushed for details. Helen just reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You okay? She asked softly. Yes, I said, and I meant it, because I hadn't given up my peace to feel compassion. I hadn't traded my safety for sentiment. I hadn't confused remorse with entitlement. That mattered. That lunch ended like any other. We paid the bill. We joked about desserts. We talked about next week's class. Life continued. That was 8 months ago. Since then, Michael and I have met a few times. Short visits, public places, coffee once in a while, neutral ground, no money. No favors, no rewriting history, just conversation, sometimes quiet, sometimes awkward, sometimes surprisingly normal. But the ending isn't what you think, because healing isn't a straight line. And forgiveness, real forgiveness, doesn't always lead where people expect it to. What came next would test everything I believed about family, accountability, and closure, and it would force me to make one final decision. One that had nothing to do with money, and everything to do with peace. Forgiving someone does not mean handing them the knife again. That was the lesson that took me 73 years to learn. It has been 8 months since that lunch at the restaurant. 8 months since Michael stood in front of me and said the words he should have said a long time ago. In that time, we have had coffee exactly 4 times. Not dinners, not holidays, not family gatherings, coffee, short meetings. Public places, neutral ground, no money, no favors, no emotional dumping. We talk about weather, books, therapy, sometimes about the kids, carefully, respectfully. And when conversations get uncomfortable, we stop. That boundary matters more than any apology ever could. Michael has paid me back $3,000 so far. It isn't much compared to what he took, but it's everything he can afford. He didn't dramatize it. He didn't expect praise. He handed me the envelope quietly and said, I'll keep going. And he has. He shows up to therapy. He listens more than he talks. He doesn't argue when I say no. He doesn't push for access. He doesn't assume. That is growth. But growth does not erase consequences. And no, I did not change my will back, not because I'm angry, not because I want revenge, not because I need to make a point. I didn't change it because I finally understood something important. That money will do more good helping sick children, women escaping abuse, and animals with no voice than it ever did propping up a grown man who refused to grow for decades. And I am at peace with that. Michael knows this. I told him plainly. This isn't punishment, I said. It's alignment. My values changed, and my estate reflects that. He didn't argue. He didn't guilt me. He didn't say, but I'm your son. He nodded. That too was new. Forgiveness, I've learned, isn't about restoring what was broken. It's about deciding what, if anything, deserves rebuilding. Some things don't, and that doesn't make you cruel. It makes you honest. Michael and I are not close. We are respectful. We are careful. We are real. And for the first time in my life, that feels healthier than pretending love means unlimited access. I don't rescue him anymore. I don't explain myself repeatedly. I don't negotiate my boundaries. If he continues doing the work, that's his choice. If he stops, that's also his choice. But either way, my life does not collapse around his decisions anymore. That is the difference. Forgiveness didn't make me smaller. It made me stronger. Because forgiving someone does not require sacrificing yourself on the altar of their comfort. It requires clarity. And clarity, I've learned, is the most compassionate thing you can offer to yourself and to others. Some scars never fully disappear. They fade, they soften. but they remain quiet reminders of what the body and the heart have endured. The scar on my stomach healed quickly. The doctors said I was fortunate. Clean incision, no complications. Within weeks, it was little more than a thin line that tugged slightly when I moved too fast. The other scar took longer. The one you can't see, the one that forms when trust breaks and doesn't fully grow back in the same shape. For months after everything happened, I'd catch myself reaching for my phone out of habit, wanting to call Michael when something small went wrong, or when something good happened and I wanted to share it. Then I'd stop, not because I was angry, not because I was cold, but because I was learning. Learning that connection doesn't have to mean obligation. Learning that love doesn't have to drain you to be real. Learning that silence can be peaceful instead of lonely. At 73 years old, I learned lessons most people never learn at all. Being kind does not mean being endlessly available. Being loving does not mean being emptied out. And being a mother does not mean being a doormat. Those truths sound obvious when you hear them. They are not obvious when you live without them for decades. I spent most of my life believing that love meant sacrifice, constant, quiet sacrifice that went unnoticed because it was expected. I believed that if I just gave a little more, tried a little harder, everything would eventually feel balanced. It never did. Balance came only when I stopped overextending. I have friends now who know me as I am, not as what I can provide. Women from water aerobics who text me jokes and complain about their knees. Neighbors who knock on my door just to chat, not to ask. I have hobbies I never prioritized before. Gardening, reading without guilt, taking long walks just because the weather is nice. I volunteer, I laugh more easily. I rest when I'm tired without apologizing for it. And for the first time in my life, I make choices based on how they feel to me, not on how they will be received by others. That shift didn't happen overnight. It came from pain, from betrayal. From a moment where I had to face the truth that the life I was protecting didn't protect me back. I don't hate Michael. I don't resent him the way I once did. I see him clearly now, flawed, learning late, responsible for his own repair. And I see myself clearly too, not as a victim, not as a martyr, but as a woman who survived something hard and chose herself afterward. The scars didn't ruin me. They taught me how to live slower. How to listen to my body, how to recognize when giving turns into self-erasure. They taught me that peace is not something you wait for. It's something you build deliberately, quietly every day. And now, when I wake up in the morning, I don't feel braced for impact. I feel present. I feel whole. I feel like the rest of my life finally belongs to me. If you're listening to this and something inside you feels tight, uneasy, or exposed, this part is for you. Discomfort isn't always a bad thing. Sometimes it's the moment your mind recognizes a truth your heart has been carrying quietly for years. If you're the one everyone leans on, the one who fixes things, the one who answers every call, solves every problem, smooths every crisis, listen to me carefully. Love without boundaries is not love. It is self-destruction dressed up as kindness. I know because I lived it for decades. I believed that being needed meant being valued, that being available meant being loved, that saying yes, even when it hurt, was proof of devotion. I was wrong. Love is not measured by how much of yourself you can give away before there's nothing left. Love is measured by respect, and respect cannot exist where boundaries are ignored. You can forgive someone and still say no. You can love someone and still step back. You can care deeply and still protect yourself. Forgiveness does not require access. It does not require proximity. It does not require self-betrayal. I almost died. And when I woke up, confused, in pain, and broke, I thought that was the worst thing that had ever happened to me. It wasn't. The worst thing was realizing how long I had been teaching people that my needs came last. The best thing that ever happened to me was finally seeing my worth clearly enough to stop negotiating it. Waking up with nothing forced me to ask a question I had avoided my entire life. Who am I when I stop being useful? The answer surprised me. I was still kind, still loving, still generous, just no longer empty. If this story resonated with you, if you recognized yourself in it, please understand this. You are not cruel for setting limits. You are not selfish for choosing rest. You are not heartless for refusing to be used. You are allowed to change, even late in life, especially late in life. And if someone only loves you when you are giving, fixing, paying, or sacrificing, that is not love. That is convenience. You deserve better than being someone else's safety net while you quietly fall apart. I don't regret what I lost. I regret how long it took me to choose myself, but I chose myself anyway. And if you're still listening, maybe this is your moment too. If this story meant something to you, like this video, subscribe for more real-life stories, and comment "I choose me" if this helped you see your own value. Thank you for listening. This was my story.